Map of Thought, Episode 32, Daron Acemoglu. Picture two neighboring towns, same soil, same climate, same natural resources sitting underground. 50 years later, one is thriving and the other is trapped in poverty. Daron Acemoglu built a career proving that the difference almost never comes down to luck, geography, or culture. It comes down to something far more specific and far more changeable: whether the courts in that town can be trusted.
Let us start with his central framework, because it reframes an entire debate about why nations succeed or fail.
Acemoglu, working closely with political scientist James Robinson, built his argument around a sharp distinction between two broad types of institutions, laid out most fully in their book Why Nations Fail. Inclusive institutions protect broad-based property rights, allow genuine political participation, and create a level playing field where a wide range of people can start businesses, invest, and innovate with reasonable confidence. The rewards will actually belong to them. Extractive institutions do close to the opposite, concentrating political and economic power in the hands of a narrow elite, who structure the whole system primarily to extract wealth from the broader population, with weak protection for anyone outside that narrow ruling group. His argument is that this single distinction, more than natural resources, climate, or even culture, explains the overwhelming majority of the gap in long-term national prosperity across history. Extractive institutions might occasionally produce short bursts of growth, particularly when a resource can simply be seized and sold, but they consistently fail to sustain long-term innovation and broad prosperity, because the very people who might otherwise invest, start businesses, or develop new technology have no real confidence their gains will not simply be seized by whoever holds power.
Give us his single most famous case study, because I know there is one that makes this argument almost impossible to dismiss.
Here is the case that made economists sit up. Two countries can share literally every variable that traditional economics usually blames for poverty: the same soil, the same climate, the same genetic and cultural population, and still end up on completely opposite ends of the wealth spectrum within a single human lifetime. If natural resources, geography, or culture were really the deciding factor, that should be impossible. It happened anyway. North and South Korea might be the cleanest natural experiment in modern economic history. Before 1945, the Korean peninsula was a single, unified society, sharing the same language, the same culture, the same ethnic population, the same historical starting point under Japanese colonial rule. Then the peninsula split into a north that built an extremely centralized, extractive command economy under a single ruling family, and a south that gradually developed, especially from the 1960s onward, increasingly inclusive economic institutions, protecting private property and allowing genuine market competition, even while its political system remained far from fully democratic for a long stretch of that same period. Satellite images of the Korean peninsula at night have become almost a visual cliché precisely because they make the argument so viscerally obvious. South Korea blazes with light, one of the most densely lit, technologically advanced regions on the planet. North Korea sits almost entirely dark, aside from a faint glow around its capital. Same people, same starting culture, same peninsula, split into two dramatically different economic outcomes within a single human lifetime. And Acemoglu's argument is that the institutional path each half chose explains nearly the entire gap.
And this connects back to the colonial history theme we have touched on elsewhere in this series.
It does, and Acemoglu built some of his most cited research specifically on colonial history, finding a genuinely striking pattern. Regions where European colonizers could not easily settle permanently, often because of disease environments deadly to European populations, tended to have colonizers build extractive institutions purely designed to pull resources out as efficiently as possible, with little investment in long-term governance quality. Regions where European populations could and did settle in large numbers tended to see colonizers build more inclusive institutions instead, protecting property rights and political participation, largely because those colonizers intended to live there permanently themselves and wanted the same protections for their own descendants. Centuries later, that early institutional choice, driven originally by something as seemingly unrelated as regional disease patterns, still shows up clearly in modern national wealth data, exactly the kind of deep, structural path dependence this series has now traced through several different thinkers.
Let us bring the core idea down to something genuinely everyday.
Think about two neighboring small towns, similar size, similar local economy, similar natural surroundings. In one town, a small business owner can trust that a contract signed with a supplier will actually be enforced fairly if something goes wrong, that a permit application will be processed based on the actual rules rather than who you happen to know, and that a competitor cannot simply bribe an inspector to shut you down. In the other town, none of that trust exists, and every business decision has to account for the very real risk of arbitrary interference from whoever currently holds local power. Even with identical natural resources and an identical starting population, the first town will attract far more genuine investment and entrepreneurial risk taking than the second, over time, purely because the underlying rules of the game are trustworthy in one case and are not in the other. That is Acemoglu's entire framework, compressed down to a scale small enough to recognize from your own experience.
Let us turn to where his more recent work has gone, because this is where the series catches up to right now.
Acemoglu has spent recent years applying this same institutional framework directly to artificial intelligence and automation, and the question he is asking is genuinely the defining economic question of this exact moment. New technology, in his framework, is never automatically good or bad for ordinary workers. It depends entirely on whether it gets deployed in a way that creates inclusive gains, expanding what workers can do and increasing their bargaining power, or in a way that is purely extractive, replacing workers outright and concentrating the resulting gains almost entirely among a small group of technology owners and shareholders. He has argued that automation historically has gone both ways, depending heavily on the specific choices made by companies and governments, not on some fixed, unavoidable law of technology itself. Some waves of automation genuinely created new categories of work and raised wages broadly. Others simply replaced tasks without creating comparable new opportunity, concentrating the gains narrowly. His concern with current artificial intelligence development is that market incentives, left entirely unchecked, tend to push companies toward the purely extractive path, replacing labor as fast and completely as possible, because that path is often more immediately profitable than the harder, slower work of designing AI systems that genuinely augment and empower human workers, rather than simply eliminating their role.
Where does this land in the live debates happening right now, in 2026 specifically?
About as directly as any thinker in this entire series connects to the present moment. Governments around the world are actively debating artificial intelligence regulation right now, weighing how much to intervene and how this technology gets deployed across labor markets, and Acemoglu's framework gives that debate its sharpest possible question. Are current AI policies being designed to make the resulting economic gains genuinely inclusive, through mechanisms like retraining support, strengthened worker bargaining power, or shared ownership structures? Or are they largely leaving the extractive default to run unchecked, simply because that is the path of least political resistance in the short term? There is also a live, geopolitical version of this same question. Nations positioning themselves for the AI era are, in effect, making the exact same institutional choice Acemoglu traced through centuries of colonial and national history, whether to build institutions broad and trustworthy enough to channel this new wave of technological power toward widely shared prosperity, or to let it concentrate narrowly among whichever companies and political actors move fastest and least accountably. Acemoglu's entire body of work suggests that choice, made largely right now, in this decade, will likely still be visible in national wealth data a century from now, the same way a decision made by colonial administrators centuries ago is still visible in a satellite photograph of the Korean peninsula tonight. That question, whether we are building institutions capable of sharing this next wave of technological power broadly, is exactly where we close this long walk through 2,500 years of thinkers. Next time, in our final episode, we bring every single one of them back into the same room, from Aristotle in the Athenian marketplace to Acemoglu watching artificial intelligence reshape labor markets in real time, and ask what the whole map actually adds up to.
See you then.